The starboard engine quit hard, a clean drop from noise to nothing that snapped the nose right and set the right prop windmilling at 1100. Mercer stamped in left rudder, trimmed against asymmetry, and leveled the gray horizon. 3,500 mean sea level, 2,000 over chop. 18 miles to Salerno into a 15-knot onshore. One engine alive, one dragging them, and no time to pretend otherwise. He kept his voice level to steady the cockpit. Starboard's out. Fuel. Boost. Crossfeed. Ready. Callow was already rolling up her sleeves, sweeping the selectors to starboard main, and working the wobble pump until the fuel pressure needle woke and shivered. Air in the line fought back through the handle, the pump trying to move hope instead of liquid. She richened the dead-side mixture, cracked crossfeed a finger width, and listened for the sound of fuel making it to the right carb. Not enough. Not steady. She eased it a fraction more and watched the needle think about staying alive. If it caught, the prop might stop being a brake. If not, the drag would keep eating distance they did not have. Out the windscreen the right prop blurred, a dumb silver pinwheel in a dull sky. The port radial's beat filled the cabin with labor, new harmonics under strain. Mercer watched the dead-side tack as a pulse, 1100, 1150, then sliding, and held just enough yaw to keep the windmilling speed above 800. Below that, they could feather. Above, the governor would fight, and they'd be dragging a disk they could not kill. The blue feather lever looked like salvation with a price. He left it where it was because the first move he made, he could not take back. Vitali's voice went into the radio's crowded throat. Salerno, Courier Black 34, starboard out, 18 west, inbound. The frequency was a bazaar, resupply call signs treading on each other, someone south asking about a belly landing. He tuned the ADF to the Salerno NDB and spun the loop, pencil digging into a salt-damp map. The paper went soft under his hand. The needle wandered like it was feeling for a wall in the dark, then settled left of straight and sulked. He marked left, knowing coastal cliffs played games with radio bearings. Haze rubbed the coastline into a smudge so the horizon offered no corrections, just rumor. Callow pumped again. Starboard fuel pressure climbed off the stop, shook between 2 and 4, then wavered. She felt the wobble handle chatter and made a fast assessment. Unbaffled tanks, slosh from evasive turns 20 minutes back, air in the pickup. She had seen it before in training, never this low over water. She cracked crossfeed a hair wider to share port fuel to the starboard line without starving the only engine that loved them. Mixture rich on the dead side to coax a cylinder, lean of peak on the live side to save heat. Carb heat, she told herself? Not yet. Partial power in wet air was ice country, but they couldn't afford a 10% hit on the only engine working unless ice stole far more a minute later. Mercer kept the nose a breath high, the old lie that level equals control, fighting the math he knew. Best glide would be 120 to 125 indicated, nose down enough to trade altitude for miles. At 110, the airspeed looked considerate. It was a trap. He put 5 pounds of forward pressure into the yoke, ready to commit to glide, and then the right engine coughed, a rude bark with no pride at all, just a cylinder finding a film of fuel. The tack twitched. The prop blur went ragged, one pot dragging steel through air. Callow's head snapped. She toggled right magnetos left, then both, listening. It wasn't recovery. It was a haunt. The sound pulled his hand back a fraction. The seconds that followed went expensive fast. The cough offered a lie. With any life on the right, maybe they could hold level, keep altitude on the ledger while the dead side sorted itself. Mercer eased the yoke back a shade. The altimeter didn't argue. It recorded. 3-4 fell to 3-3. The port engine loaded and hummed, EGT bouncing. Asymmetry pressed his foot. He told himself he was buying choice by not diving. The sea took the difference and kept it. The costs were quiet. Callow scanned like a metronome. EGTs, oil, fuel pressure. Right side carb heat down 1 notch, or ice will build, but carb heat costs power they can't spare. She took the penalty on the live engine instead to keep it safe in moist air, trading a slice of horsepower now to avoid ice at the worst moment later. On starboard she richened gently, coaxing a fire to take. The throttle moved a touch, the EGT flickered, fuel pressure hopped, but nothing loved them enough to stay. She set numbers because numbers were the only language machines respect, and kept one fingertip on the feather guard, like a promise she wasn't ready to speak. Vitali bullied the ADF into a bearing through the bedlam. The beacon's tone came thin from under static. Salerno's English arrived chopped and distant. He slipped their tail number between other emergencies and got back a "stand by" that meant you are not the only ones. The needle suggested a left drift again. Left would cut a corner if the land was kind, or carve them into rock if the cliffs lived where he remembered. He penciled 3 degrees left by feel and hated the guess as soon as he owned it. A lower band of cloud smeared the horizon. Onshore wind, 12 to 15 knots, pushed into their nose, carving cat's paws into the sea that ran toward a coast they could not see. The live engine swallowed that wind and turned it into a climb that wasn't, the dead engine's cough easing yaw just enough to tempt Mercer to sit on level. He felt the first touch of mechanical turbulence telegraph through the yoke, a punch and a float as unseen bluffs reached out to shape the air. The right prop's blur seemed to stumble when they hit a bump. The tack assured him it hadn't. The illusion still worked on his nerves. The aft load talked, lashes groaning as crates tugged under pitch changes. 2 ammo boxes and dispatch pouches, steady weight with edges, the sea would not care about. Aft CG softened the elevator. Every trim change felt spongy. Best glide now would buy them 24 miles on a clean day. With a windmilling prop and a headwind, it didn't. Level flight at 110 dumped altitude at a rate they would not get back. Mercer knew it and held one more breath anyway. Callow counted the dead Tash's vulgar rhythm, beats that kept it above feather. The governor would resist any attempt to stop the blade at this RPM. If the cough died and the number slid under 800, they'd feather and lose a bucket of drag. If it held like this, it stole yards with every spin. She considered tricking the governor with pitch, dismissed it here. The bargain was simple. The engine would either give them permission to clean up or deny it until near shore when it would be too late to matter. Vitali tried the field in Italian. Torre di Salerno, motore starboard fuori, 18 miglia, rota ovest. The reply was a stutter under traffic. The ADF needle hunted left and he watched it, knowing it could be lying, wanting to believe it told the shorter truth. He marked left again and stared at the coast's gray band, trying to find the dark bevel of cliff in all that sameness. The headwind was more than a number now. It was feel on his face and the way the world slowed beneath them. Mercer read the yoke like a telegraph. The left radial still gave honest push. The right kept coughing enough to keep him lazy. He told himself 1 minute more before he'd set best glide, then said it out loud. 1 minute. Saying it made it real. He watched the EGT sawtooth on the dead side, firing, cooling, firing, watched the right fuel pressure stumble, drunk between 2 and 4, and convinced himself the crossfeed would catch with the next pulse. He kept the ball centered and felt the windmilling blade yank them infinitesimally away from where the coast lived. Below, the sea waited. They had flares, a dinghy, knives, all the things that make a ditching seem like an exercise until you're close enough to smell salt. Mercer pictured swell and flare and belts cut under gray water, and his hand still preferred the sound of a cough to the clean math of glide. He watched Callow's hands and knew she was calculating the thermal insults he'd deliver if he hauled power later. He lied to himself and promised he'd push in 60 seconds. Physics took the bet and started the clock. Sink at 110 with asymmetry would steal reach. Vitali marked a tiny cross on the map for time passed and told himself he'd erase it later. The needle kept trying to drag them left. The tower stepped on their calls to vector a fat transport and then a broken C-47 south of Agropoli. The radio was indifferent. It didn't care whose name you had. Mercer said it. We hold level 1 more minute. Not pride, just a tired wager. The right engine coughed like it wasn't done being cruel, the sound threading into his bones. He eased the nose up an inch to keep the illusion alive and told himself the minute started now. The first irreversible cost came due the moment he chose to spend altitude on hope. That minute was a thief. At 110, indicated with one prop, just a ragged blur, and the other carrying everything, the deck angle felt kind, but the altimeter fell, 3,2700, while the shoreline stayed smudged. The windmilling prop refused to drop below feather RPM, perfect in its wrongness. The aft load tugged at the tail, making the yoke a balance beam. He kept the horizon where denial told him because the cough was a drug. Every second bought nothing the sea would honor. Callow slid forward between the seats, eyes on needles. "Carb heat," she said, already pulling. 10%, Mercer warned, because power was shrinking. 10 now beats ice later, she snapped, setting a careful notch. The live engine's note roughened and sagged, then steadied. The dead one barked once, a sickroom sound that smelled like hope because it wore fuel. She eased mixture lean of peak on the left and placed her thumb on the crossfeed guard. Crossfeed could feed the sick engine. It could also starve the good one if air ran the pipes. "Say when," she said, handing the risk to him because he had to own it. Vitali hunched over the map, the ADF needle twitching left like a cat. He called again, voice threaded between other emergencies. The beacon bearing spat out 260, then sulked. He drew the line, felt the lie, and resisted the urge to throw the whole radio set into the sea. The onshore built into their face and turned into more than a number. The coast stayed a pushed-away thing. Mercer's eyes met the left-pulling needle, and he denied it with rudder and patience. He held the minute until it had punished him enough. Best glide now or nothing later. "Crossfeed," Callow said, this time not asking, and cracked the gate. Fuel pressure on the dead side climbed a notch and steadied weakly. The six-cylinder coughed in a 3-beat, then faded, enough to keep the prop spinning fast enough to deny feather once more. Drag without power, the meanest of all worlds. "Right 5, Vitali called, voice level, finally calling his own earlier mistake. The ADF was bouncing off stone. Left had been a lie, the cliff told. Mercer nudged right and felt the prop drag change in his foot. The sea's chop wrote the wind's angle in white scraps. Their crab was honest now. He held it and let the headland claim whatever signal trick it needed. The decision lived in hands, not needles. "Commit," Callow said, breaking the minute's spell. "We're buying hope with altitude." He pushed. The nose dipped. Airspeed walked to 125. The sink rate became a clean line. The live engine's tone brightened. The dead engine hiccuped once more and then sagged. The airplane stopped pretending to be level and started making miles. It felt like betrayal in his gut and relief in the yoke. He took it. As they dropped, the onshore increased its argument, the invisible hand of bluffs turning wind into stares. The yoke talked in pulses now. Mercer held the ball near true and trimmed the aft CG out of his forearms. Best glide felt fast for a cripple, but the shoreline finally thickened, surf becoming lace, a road a white stitch, cliffs dark and absolute north of their line. ADF drift appeared honest now only because it no longer mattered. The land told them what the radio couldn't. The dead tack slid, 840, 830. "Drop," Callow whispered, willing it. 820, and then it gave them what they needed. "Now," she snapped. Mercer lifted the red guard and drove the feather switch. The hub motor whined, the blade's blur slowed, stopped, and turned into a bronze scythe. Drag fell away like a hand off their chest. The airplane sighed and lengthened her glide. That was the first clean, irreversible act. There would be no coaxing the starboard back now. It was better this way, and cruel to admit it so late. Vitali's right correction put a pale sleeve of sand in the glass, a crescent south of a black headland with white spittle at its feet. "South is beach, north is cliff," he said, repeating the controller's truth as a spell. "Wind stronger near shore. Expect bumps." He marked a thicker shadow where the headland folded out, a reminder of the ADF's earlier pull. He felt foolish for believing a needle over terrain and grateful for the chance to fix it before the coast fixed them. Mechanical turbulence arrived like a staircase. The left wing lifted, settled, then a downdraft tugged. Mercer held pitch against the urge to yank. He added 2 knots for gust, stealing a sliver of range to buy stall margin. He found the slip in his hand and bled a thread of altitude over empty water without touching speed. The controls grew heavy and honest, the way they do when you're doing the only right thing left. "Carb ice," Callow said softly, hearing a thin erosion in the live engine's tone, a note missing. She pushed the carb heat forward to full now that glide was committed. RPM sagged, stumbled, then came back stronger as melt washed through the throat. The engine took breath again. 10% was a bill they could pay now. She checked CHTs and leaned a hair to keep head temp from dropping faster than metal could bear. Shock cool could crack plugs and warp valves. She'd seen the porcelain split under a careless hand once. Not today. 220 holds, Vitali said of the ADF, which mattered less and less. He saw the vineyards rising behind the beach like combs, terraces stepping up to stone. The road ran white and straight behind the sand. He put the map under his thigh because it had no more to give. He tuned the radio down 1 notch to quiet the world of other emergencies and made room for their own. The rocky point drew in, big in the right window, spray flicking like diamonds against glass. The beach south of it was narrow but real, a long, damp bar with people the size of pins running. The pocket inside the point, a little notch of sand, might hold them if they worked hard. The long beach beyond looked kinder but too far at this sink. The ADF had tried to put them on the headland. Wind and the minute had helped. They had made their correction. Now came the exact flying. "Hold damp sand," Mercer said. Surf was a risk. Dry sand was a trap. He kept the flare in his head, smooth and patient, speed honest, and made one more small S-turn to shed a hand's worth of height without surrendering forward. The starboard blade sat still, a ruler on the sky. He watched it to judge drift. A cropline fence inland turned out to be stakes at the start of a vineyard, a grid of killers. "Leave the gear," Callow said, voice tight. "Belly it. Sand will grab a wheel and tear us sideways." He wanted the comfort of wheels. He gave up the reflex. "Belly," he said, and committed to that too. Vitali tucked the pouch under his leg, then lifted his eyes. A truck stopped on the road. Men climbed down, faces turned to water. Gulls left the rack in a white sheet, clearing a ribbon of sand. He said nothing more on the radio because none of the voices coming back could lift them over the last stone. The point's shadow ran over the cowling. The left wing tickled a tiny stall at the tip. Mercer caught it with rudder and fixed his hand. He set a shallow crab to ride the onshore, nose angled into wind, body aligned with the bar of damp. The surf to his left broke a cue earlier than the sets on either side, warning of a curl of gust down the beach. He felt it hit the tail and the nose want to weathercock. He held it with boot and aileron and counted breaths. "Master off at touch, fuel off, mags cold," Callow said, making the ditching checklist hers, even if this would be sand. Her foot kicked the lashings on the crates. still tight. She kept her fingers over red knobs, ready to murder what had served them a second earlier. She waited for the smell that means fire. It didn't come. The shadow under them sharpened into a crisp twin. Mercer eased the yoke back, constant, patient, bleeding to 110, 108, no lower. The airplane shivered in the last cushion of ground effect. The onshore shoved once more from the left, and he let the nose drift a hand to keep wings level. Too much correction would jackknife them into a stall, too little, and the right wing would eat the foam. He took a breath and held it down in his chest. Touch. The belly met damp sand with a sound like all the breath in the world leaving at once. Skid, hiss, a grainy roar that climbed into the cabin and took every frequency the engine had owned. The airplane slewed. Mercer held opposite aileron and kept the nose up, holding the prop from digging and flipping them. Callow yanked the mixtures through their detents, then the mags, then the master, a ritual done fast but not sloppy. The port prop scythed to its last cut, then fell still. The feathered starboard stayed elegant and useless, a blade with nothing to cut. They slid. The trench they plowed threw sand against the belly and up at the windshield in ribbons. The surf reached and fell, reached again, falling short by a yard, greedy for the next try. The skid line straightened as the belly dug, aligning them as if someone had grabbed the tail and pulled. The hiss softened. The air got quiet around the tick-tick-tick of hot metal, thinking about its new shape. Vitali was already out of his harness, one hand on the side hatch, the other on the pouch. He didn't fling the door, he eased it, keeping the aircraft a shell until they knew if the surf would claim her on the second wave. The road over the dune went white with men moving, some in rough civilian coats, one in a jacket with a stripe. He heard a shouted, "Ahai," stretched by onshore wind, a cousin to "Hey," a mile away. He did not answer yet. Mercer kept the yoke back until it didn't ask anything of him, then let it down. He patted the panel once, not for luck, for thanks. The starboard blade hung at the right angle to suggest a church icon, and he snorted despite himself. Callow lifted the hatch, and salt air poured in, carrying seaweed and diesel and grapes on wind from inland. She sniffed for fuel and fire, and found neither. The plane settled a final inch as sand rearranged, a small sigh of aluminum on grit. The surf died and came again. It didn't reach them. The gulls looped back and scolded, because that's what gulls do. The men from the road slowed within shouting distance, curious, wary, voices a braid of Italian and something else. Vitali set one boot in damp sand and felt it take him half an inch. He looked to the crates, and then to the pouch, and then to Mercer. The next move was both obvious and dangerous. "Crates first," Mercer said, eyes on the spill of foam creeping closer, then to the faces over the dune. Then the pouch. Callow already had a knife in her palm to cut lashings if the surf shifted. Vitali crouched to lift, the paper sweating through canvas onto his forearm. The beach smelled like brine and hot oil and grapes crushed somewhere up the slope. Sand beat against aluminum belly in a steady, impatient whisper. They moved.